Hello and welcome to the Genuine Learning Blog. My name is Melissa Galasso, and today we're going to talk about a new study that was issued by the ACFE looking at fraud and COVID. So the ACFE has issued an updated September 2020 report. So if you've been attending any classes and talking about risk assessment, one area of focus is obviously that the fraud triangle is in a great opportunity area, right? People working from home, furloughs, reduction in staff, and as a result, opportunity is growing. Plus, when we think about pressures and rationalization under COVID, we can see where all three elements of the fraud triangle make fraud more likely. But we've been talking about it more in terms of theory. However, we now have some data to back it up. And so the ACFE has been doing a study, and we're going to take a look into some of the material that they've offered, but I definitely recommend that you take a deep dive into this, especially if you're an auditor, to really think about how this might impact you. So the title of the study is Fraud in the Wake of COVID-19, and it's a benchmarking report. It was issued in September, and it goes through August of 2020. And they're doing it sort of periodically to kind of get a trend analysis. And so this is their look. Obviously, the ACFE, our fraud examiners, were very interested in what this is looking like and how COVID is going to really impact them. So as of August, again, that was really the driving factor there. That's when their cutoff was of 2020. 77% of respondents said they had observed an increase in the overall level of fraud. So it's not a theory. It's not just that the triangle is showing symptoms. It's that we're actually seeing it. 1/3 noted that the increase was significant. So when we think about this, so they had done a study in May of 2020, and this is an increase. So from May to August, we've seen an increase in fraud, and we'll take a look at some of the types. But what I think is more interesting to focus on is what we expect in the future. So we have some data to indicate that fraud's on the rise. 92% of these respondents expect to see a further increase in the overall level of fraud during the next year. Nearly half think that increase is going to be significant. Now, this is not a US study. I do want to draw attention to that. It is a worldwide study. And there's some really great details in the actual study that we have here for you to make sure that you're aware of. But highly recommend that we take a look at it because it really explains the types of people who are responding to the survey, where they're coming from, so you can kind of get a feel for the implications. These next two slides are really, in my opinion, super interesting. So it looks at the various types of fraud, and it compares what they had observed, right? So actuals in May versus actuals in August, and then compares it to their expectation. And what you'll see is in most of them, we have a rise, but what's really interesting is the expectation of the future. So you can see for cyber fraud, for example, it went from 81%, right? Obviously a big issue, to 83%, and expectation of 90% expected over the next 12 months. Unemployment fraud was not tested or not responded to in the May survey, so we don't have a starting point for that, but if you just look at the expectation, as you can probably imagine, unemployment, as we have the economy still struggling to come back to full amount, we think that's going to be a big issue. 85 expectation related to payment fraud expected. They also look at fraud by vendors, healthcare, identity fraud, insurance, loan and bank fraud, bankruptcy fraud, again, another one that they didn't study in May, but started tracking in August. Employee embezzlement, financial statement fraud, 72%. Look at in May, 30%, then August, 41%, but 72% expected in the next year. That's probably a lot of the December year ends, right? So we've had our May and our June year ends. We have some September year ends, but obviously the big expectation is what's going to happen for financial statement purposes this upcoming December, where we have a lot of corporate, a lot of commercial year ends. And so kind of an interesting thing just to keep in the back of our mind. And then obviously bribery, another one that sees a very large spike from May until what the expectation is going to be. And really, one of the things that they show here is that it's getting harder to actually detect it. So the change is increasing, you can see here on average. And so the difficulty of having these anti-fraud because of work from home, because of some of these, changes, not being able to fly, not being able to be physically present to do some of this work, these loss prevention and fraud examiners, right? There is more difficulty for them to actually even identify these fraud and to perform anti-fraud activities. So this is a comparison of the current top 5 fraud schemes compared to the future top five. So currently the top identified fraud is cyber fraud, which was a 47% increase from the May reading. So 83% overall increase. And then we have unemployment fraud, fraud by vendors and sellers, payment fraud, and identity theft. Not too differently, if we go over to what the expectation is in the next 12 months, cyber fraud is still going to be at the top. Obviously, we have a prime opportunity here with people working from home. They don't necessarily have the same level of security that they would if they were working in an office. So the expectation there is pretty high. Unemployment fraud stays in the top 2. However, payment fraud comes up into the top 3rd, so it moves up a slot. And then healthcare fraud joins the top 5 for the first time in the expectation category, followed by fraud by vendors and sellers. So just something that if you are doing risk assessment and you're getting ready for those December year ends, this is something that we think you should be considering. And the ACFE has done an amazing job of providing us with the data to support the theory that we've been talking about for risk assessment. All right, so that's a wrap for this week's blog. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I hope to see you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.